Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open Liaquat Ahmed's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Lords of Finance. We're going to find out the story of the bankers who, through a series of absolutely epic misjudgments, they broke the world and sent it spiraling into the Great Depression.
So let's just start with this. It's a truly shocking quote. Back in 1931, Winston Churchill, who had just lost a ton of his own money in the Wall Street crash, said this about Montague Norman, the governor of the Bank of England, the most powerful central banker on the entire planet. What on earth could have made Churchill so incredibly angry that he literally wanted to see this guy hanged?
To get that rage, we've got to travel back to August 1931. At this point, the world economy isn't just in a slump, it's in a total, terrifying nosedive. Banks are slamming their doors shut, millions of people are out of a job, and the whole idea of capitalism seems to be just crumbling. And right at this moment, with the world basically on fire, Montague Norman, the guy who's supposed to be the captain of global finance, he does something just unbelievable. He walks off the job. He has a complete nervous breakdown, gets on a ship to Canada, and just tells the press he needs a rest.
I mean, can you just imagine the pressure he was under? In the industrial powerhouses of America and Germany, production had tanked by 40%. Prices for everything had fallen by a quarter. And in the U.S. alone, 8 million people were unemployed. The entire system was teetering on the edge of total collapse.
Norman's breakdown, you see, it wasn't just some personal tragedy. It was a symbol for the whole world. It basically screamed that the people in charge had absolutely no answers. The captain had jumped ship in the middle of a hurricane. And that brings us to the real question. How did things get this bad?
Well, the book argues that the answer really lies with four key men. See, after World War I, the massive job of rebuilding the world's shattered financial system fell to the heads of the four biggest central banks. The newspapers back then called them the most exclusive club in the world.
So let's meet the main players in this drama. In Britain, you've got the very neurotic Montague Norman. Over in New York, the energetic but totally overworked Benjamin Strong. In Germany, the brilliant but oh-so-arrogant Hjalmar Schacht. And finally, in France, the deeply suspicious Émile Moreau. This quartet, they were the ones tasked with putting the world economy back together.
And their first big decision? It would turn out to be their most catastrophic. They had to choose what to build this new global economy on. What would be its foundation?
They made a fateful choice, to go back to the gold standard. Now for these guys, this wasn't just a policy. It was practically a religion. The gold standard was this symbol of the stable, prosperous world they lost before the war. They saw it as the only thing that could guarantee financial prudence, a system that would discipline politicians who might be tempted to just print more money. For them, it was the only way.
But here's the problem. That promise of stability, it quickly turned into a brutal straitjacket. See, under the gold standard, if your economy started to fail, you couldn't just pump money in to get things going again. Why? Because every dollar, every pound was backed by a real, fixed amount of gold. If you printed more money, people would panic. So to defend your currency, you had to do the exact opposite of what the economy needed. You had to raise interest rates, which just choked off growth even more. It became what the book calls gold fetters, basically chaining all the economies together as they sank.
So, shackled by this incredibly rigid system, these four bankers then spent the 1920s making one bad policy decision after another. And each mistake just made the next one worse, setting off this fatal domino effect.
Okay, let's walk through this path to disaster. First, you've got the whole world economy just poisoned by these crushing war debts from World War I. Germany owes reparations it can't possibly pay, and the Allies owe a fortune to the U.S. It's a toxic mess. Second, that inflexible gold standard makes it impossible for anyone to find a way out. This leads directly to step 3, bad decisions. To help Britain stay on the gold standard, the U.S. keeps its interest rates artificially low. But where does all that cheap money go? It pours into the stock market, fueling a gigantic speculative bubble. And finally, in 1929, that bubble bursts. U.S. money dries up, the whole debt system collapses, and the world plunges into the Great Depression. And the crazy thing is, all the while, there was one man who saw this whole disaster coming. The brilliant economist John Maynard Keynes. He was like a Cassandra figure. He was on the sidelines, warning them at every single turn, predicting the catastrophe with pinpoint accuracy. But the men in charge, they were just too trapped in their old way of thinking to listen. So let's get back to Churchill's anger. And that question we started with. Who was actually responsible for this completely man-made disaster?
Was this whole thing just an unavoidable economic blizzard, like a lot of people called it back then? You know, some kind of a natural disaster that was just totally beyond human control.
Lords of Finance answers that with a resounding no. This was not an act of God. The book is crystal clear. The Great Depression was the direct result of a series of catastrophic blunders made by these very men.
Now, these bankers weren't evil. They were trapped. They were prisoners of the economic ideas of their time. Their unshakable belief in the gold standard totally blinded them to what was really happening, and it paralyzed them when the crisis finally hit. More than anything, it was a failure of imagination.
And you know, this isn't just some dusty old history lesson. The author actually wrote the end of this book in October 2008, right in the heart of another massive global financial crisis. He was watching firsthand as the same old forces of fear, bad ideas, and human error were playing out all over again. It just goes to show how easy it is to forget these lessons.
So in the end, the story of these four men, who tried so hard to save the world but ended up breaking it, it leaves us with a really stark and important question for our own time. In our world, with all its new economic challenges, have we really, truly learned the lessons from the Lords of Finance?